Hello, my name is Shah, and I like talking about history and international human rights law. I'm continuing with my discussion on um, the Shahs of Iran. Shah again means king, and so I was talking about the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty. That's Reza Khan. Sorry, Reza Shah Pahlavi, right? And he was the uh, brigadier general who executed a coup supported by the British in 1921, and then he was subsequently installed, elected by the Iranian parliament, Persian parliament, in 1925, and was coronated as the founder of the first Pahlavi Shah of Iran. Shah again means king. Um, and by the way, the back and forth between Persia and Iran, it was Reza Shah who, in a way, at least to us outside of Iran, he created that sort of conflict because in 1935 he notified foreign delegates and the League of Nations to start to formally designate um, Persia as Iran, to use Iran as its official, you know, name. Um, Later on, though, when his son was now ruling, his son indicated that uh, they were interchangeable, that both Persia and Iran can be used. Interestingly, it's the name Persia was used by ancient Greeks, right, to describe that area of Iran. But internally, it turns out, at least since the time of the Sassanid Empire, since 224 AD, which was subsequently conquered by the um, Islamic Empire under the Arabians in 651 AD. Anyway, since the Sasanian Empire, Iran had been used, right, to describe the Persians. Iran had been used, and internally, the natives, the indigenous people, have always referred to themselves as Iran. So it's Westerners, English speaking, the English speaking world, and due to the influence of the ancient Greeks, they use that term Persia, right? Because again, I've done a video discussing how in Iran they have various ethnic groups, right? It's more than one ethnic group that lives that's indigenous to that area of Iran, but the Persians are the majority. Persians are the majority. They constitute 61%. Um, and I mentioned how, interestingly, Reza Pahlavi, Shah Pahlavi himself, was not an ethnic. He was not an ethnic Persian. He was uh, Mazani, right? Mazani was that's Iranian Mazani. That's one of the ethnic groups in Iran. However, ironically, he pursued an aggressive policy of Persianization as he tried to make Iran homogenous, right? So not imposing his ethnic group, but trying to impose Persian, right? Persian identity on all of Iran. So well, Persian was already the official language of Iran a long time ago, and he pursued this policy of centralization, trying to, and again, and trying to impose some kind of homogenous identity, right? Vis-a-vis Persian, right? Persian, right? The Persian identity on Iran. Um, so if one would find, because of the ancient interactions that The other ethnic groups had no problem, though, um, using Persian, right? Using Persian or the Persian language, even though, there was an ethnic group called, there were the Persians, the Fars, and Farsi is their language. There are other languages there, but there's no problem being able to speak Persian and still maintain their identity because the various governments, centralizing governments, national governments were usually mainly Persian, right? So in any event, Reza Shah became um, he became Shah of Iran in 1925. So he was the person who he had no aristocratic background. He was actually illiterate. He had no formal education, but through his military accomplishments, he and the support of the British, he became the Shah of Iran, the first, founding the Pahlavi dynasty. Interestingly, though, he tried to reduce the influence of the Russians and the British, right? And the British, who sort of um, indirectly ruled Iran through the Anglo-Persian oil company, right? Because they had a 51% interest in the company. So and he tried to move away from them. Sometime in 1932, he had actually cancelled. He just unilaterally cancelled the agreement with the Anglo-Persian oil company that's given the concession, which gave Iran just 16% of the net profits. He demanded that they increase their share, Iran's share, to 21% of the net profits. So they worked out a new agreement in any event. So um, somehow he tried to now move towards um, other powers, other Western powers, and one of them was Germany. He tried to court Germany, and he welcomed, uh, German businesses. He had actually, you know, banned the British Imperial Airways. That's what it was called then, from using flying over Iran, over Persia at that time, and instead he conceded to Lufthansa, the German-owned Lufthansa Airlines. So he gravitated, tried to seek great relations, right? Cordial relations, deepened relations with Germany. And this was reciprocated by the Nazis. Remember, the Nazis had a lot of these racist ideology about the Aryans, right? The Aryans. So the Nazis, Hitler specifically, um, had cordial relations with Reza Shah. So in their publications, the Nazis claimed that the Aryans, right? That the Aryans, that's Iran's, Iran, that they were related, right? That they shared a kinship. That the Germans and Persians shared a kinship, right? And they were both Aryans, right? So of course the Iranians, those are the ancient Aryans, right? The Persians, that's Iran means land of the Aryans, right? And of course, they had these great civilizations, and you can see the Nazis try to associate themselves ethnically, genetically, with these ancient Aryans, the Persians, because um, I've talked about Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great, his empire, the Persian Empire he founded, that's the Achaemenid Empire, right, was. It was the largest in the world at that time, and they did a lot. They had all these great accomplishments, and so this was what the Nazis tried to propagate. Right? Uh, uh, they tried to uh, project this idea of great achievement as a race, as a German people, right? And so they try to create narratives that were false, linking them to, Persians. So what the Hitler actually did was in 1939 he gave Reza Shah, he gave him the German Scientific Library, which has 7,500 books on eugenics, which try to convince Persians of the kinship between the Germans and the Persians, and uh, ancient, modern Aryans and the ancient Aryans. And so Hitler actually admired Reza Shah, right? Admired Reza Shah, and he sent him a personal signed um, autograph of his photo, of his picture, saying with best wishes to His Imperial Majesty Reza Shah, the Shah and Shah of Iran. By the way, Shah and Shah means King of Kings, right? That was one of his titles, one of the titles of the Shahs of Iran. The Shah and Shah of Iran, King of Kings of Iran, and he said best wishes Adolf Hitler, and and likewise, Reza Shah himself admired Hitler. He told his son, Mohammed Reza Shah noted this. By the way, a very interesting source uh, is a book by Ray Take. Ray Take. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. It's called the Last Shah. Last Shah, and uh, talks about the fall of the Pahlavi dynasty, right? So it's very interesting book on the Pahlavis, on Reza Shah and his son Mohammed Reza Shah. So that's Reza Shah, admired Hitler. He told his son that, well, he liked Hitler a lot because, like him, he had an undistinguished background and he rose to to ultimate power, right? Hitler as well, Hitler never was a dropout, never went to college. He was in never do well actually. Hitler at some point had been homeless. So it's astonishing, the way he rose. He joined the military, which is so interesting that these two people, the military gave them their break, right? The military gave them their break. So we have to be careful, the sort of people that um, the military sort of creates or lets it. But the military gave them their break, and Hitler, of course, was in the First World War. He'd been awarded it was a decorated soldier, although he had a low rank, of course, because he wasn't an officer. He wasn't an officer. And after that, after the First World War, and when Germany was defeated and they had to deal with the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty of Versailles, he became a secret agent. Was trained as a secret agent for uh, by the uh, by the German army, and initially he was sent to spy on these social German Work Socialist Party, which became the Nazis, and because they were trying to ward off communists and things like that. You can see how that turned out, but he eventually resigned from the military and fully took over the Nazi Party, and of course the rest is a sad history. And in terms of the Shah, of course, he was orphaned, didn't come from an aristocratic background. virtually illiterate, no formal schooling, but he joined the military, uh, the um, the Persian Cossack Brigade at 16, and eventually rose to be a brigadier general. And of course, he did the coup, and he was subsequently elected to be Shah of Iran, King of Iran. So he talked about how he touted, emphasized how he and Hitler shared parallels. And in fact, in German Nazi propaganda back in Germany, they circulated these parallels as well. These parallels between the Shah and the Führer and Hitler. Uh, the Nazi cabinet actually exempted Persians, right, from the Nuremberg laws, the notorious Nuremberg laws of the Nazis. So the Nuremberg laws were passed by the Nazis, and what they did was they divested Jews of German citizenship. They stripped the Jews of German citizenship. They prohibited any German or anyone, sort of connected to them, you know, racially, maybe like an English person, but prevented Germans from intermarrying or having sexual relations with Jewish people, right? Just, and they were terrible, odious laws. And so, but the Hitler's cabinet would exempt Persians, saying, apart from Germans, the Persians were the only true Aryans, right? The true Aryans. So there was this myth about Persians and Aryans, right? And so it's kind of, by the way, I do this. I normally, I notice sometimes there's voice. So I'm slapping my hand on my lap. I do that often as I talk, as a gesticulation. So I apologize. But yeah, so there was this cordial, uh, best BFF, best friend relationship between Adolf Hitler and Reza Shah. Reza Shah, of course, he also admired others. So when he initially became the Shah of Iran, he had contemplated uh, turning Iran into a republic, because another leader he admired was Ataturk, right? Mustafa Kemal Ataturk of Turkey. Um, but he had been talked against it. The aristocrats, the parliament didn't want that, and so he didn't make um, Iran a republic. And but what he ended up being a despot, an autocrat, and he ruled very repressively. I'm going to do another video talking about his accomplishments, but he was effective in unifying Iran, right, through his Persianization and strength centralization efforts. He rapidly built uh, the military to a 100,000 strong force, 100,000 men, soldiers. He built the civil service. So he executed a number of reforms focused on nationalizing, creating this sense of national unity amongst Iranians. And he created a civil service with 90,000 workforce, national civil service with a 90,000 workforce. He paid them. Of course, Iran was receiving a lot of oil now, and the highest paid people, so they could be his tool, were the military, right? So he paid the military were the best paid people. He also had a secret police. He established the national secret police just to keep people in check. He wanted to stop, communism and any sort of insurrection. So he was a despot, right? And so he paid these very well in order to secure his reign. Um, so now he also had this patronage system, right? The patronage system through the courts, in which he had his lackeys, his marionettes, his favorites, and he also did something. He confiscated lands in Iran, and so they became like his personal property. By the time he was forced to abdicate in 1941, um, he was the richest man in Iran. So you can imagine somebody who had once been a servant, not from the aristocratic Iranian families. He became the richest man in Iran. He had three. He gave to his son, who took over, who was installed as to succeed him as Shah. That's Mohammed Reza Pahlavi. He gave him £3 million, right? Cash in his bank account, £3 million back then in 1941. In 2024's money, that's approximately $288 million or $300 million. You can imagine that amount in cash, uh, $300 million in cash. That's a lot of money. And he gave him 3 million acres of land. Of course, he had dispossessed a lot of the Persian aristocrats, the aristocrats who owned land. He dispossessed them of their lands, made them his property. He also got into these conflicts with the clerics, right? The religious clerics who had a lot of shrines, a lot of great lands, right? Uh, for pilgrimage that also received a lot of endowments. He seized them, he appropriated them. He was always in this conflict with the Muslim clerics, and this would eventually stir the spark of the revolution, and the accumulation of grievances over time would spark of the revolution in 1979. So in his quest to westernize Iran, he tried to westernize Iran, modernize Iran. He tried to draw very close to the West. He had this agreement with Germany. Germany was going to set up, steel factories in Iran. He wanted to rapidly modernize Iran. He would hire Western teachers. He implemented unfavorable, a number of changes in his quest to westernize and modernize Iran that sort of gored the ox of um, of the clerics, the Muslim clerics, and the mostly rural people. Iran was over 80% rural, and they were a quarter of Iran were nomads at the time. So he had this policy of sedentary, trying to urbanize and force the nomads to settle down in towns, right? So it's called sedentism, right? Try to force them to settle down in towns, and he tried to rapidly urbanize Iran as well. So it was. Um, he also established many draconian laws. I'm going to focus on that in subsequent videos because I want to keep this video short. Um, but his relationship with um, Adolf Hitler, his closeness to Adolf Hitler would lead to his eventual forced abdication in 1941. Of course, he had been trying to become an ally of the Axis powers, right? The Axis powers. And of course, Iran was very strategic because it had so much oil, right? So when the war was coming up, Iran was supposed to was the source of oil for the Allies, right? They needed, the Iran's oil supply. The British needed it, and also the Allied forces also needed it to be able to supply Russia, because Russia was an ally. The USSR was an ally of the United States and Britain. The United States wouldn't get into the war until late in December 1941, after they were bombed by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. But uh, uh, Reza Shah was forced to abdicate in August of 1941. What happened was there was a joint Russian and British USSR and British invasion of of Iran in 1941 when they saw that he was drawing very close to Germany, and he promised to make Iran a source of oil supply for the Germans. And in order to also, they tried to just immediately kick Iran out to prevent Hitler, the Axis powers, from being able to use Iran to attack Russia, given that Iran, which was supposed to be neutral, had made itself, he was a personal ally of Adolf Hitler. So what happened was um, um, he was blindsided by both the Russians and Britain. That's USSR. When I'm saying Russian, I mean USSR and Britain, who were allies, and they jointly invaded Iran in 1941. Uh, it's ironic that his 100,000 military force could not do anything. He had invested so much money on his military forces, paramilitary. They couldn't do anything when when USSR uh, and Britain entered. And in order to keep Iran out of the Second World War, he capitulated immediately. Um, in September in September 1941, he was forced to abdicate. His favorite prime minister wrote an abdication letter, and he signed it. So he abdicated in favor of his son. So Reza Shah eventually, you know, he was the richest man in Iran at this time. As I said, he was forced. He was exiled to Mauritius, and subsequently he went to live in South Africa. First of all in Durban, and in Johannesburg, and where he died um, in 1944. So very interesting, serendipitous, meteoric rise for someone who went from being a servant, an orphan servant, to becoming king of Iran and the richest man in Iran, one of the richest men in the world because of the control of oil. I'm going to do subsequent videos discussing his accomplishments, his policies in Iran, and so we can see why the tensions, how he started to create tension with the Muslim clerics, right? The Ayatollahs, the Muslim clerics. He started to destroy the Masradas, um, in in um, in in Iran, and he rapidly started to build schools and to educate, give Iranians Western secular education. Right, he developed the University of Tehran. Uh, he tried to create a Muslim bloc, right, with against Western aggression. So he was constantly trying to, by the way, play off uh, Russia and Britain, even though Iran was um, indirectly ruled by Britain through the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, right? He tried to move towards countries um, like Turkey. He particularly admired, Ataturk, the leader of Turkey, and he thought maybe Turkey, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran, could all create, if Syria could all create some kind of bloc um, against Western aggression. But again, and the reason he tried to pursue the uh, the Persianization of Iran was he was trying to copy Turkey, Ataturk, what Ataturk did in Turkey with the Turkification of Turkey, right? So to create one national unity and impose some sort of homogenous identity. And this was what he was trying to do in Iran as well. But it's a sad thing that he he admired Hitler, and Hitler in turn admired him. But it's a good thing that the Allied forces, that's the Anglo-Russian invasion of 1941, in August 1941, they were able um, to keep Iran out of the Second World War and force the abdication of Reza Shah. So I'm going to continue with a subsequent video and detail his reign and some of his policies, and those policies that created um, uh, uprising and resentment against the Shahs, the Pahlavis in Iran. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.